Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our conversation with Dr. Michele Vecchione-Finneran. She is an amazing psychologist and board member of my company, MOTH. And we are so lucky to have her today to talk about mental health. As Mental Health Awareness Month is approaching in May, we thought it'd be a great time to start having some of these conversations about what's going on in the mental health world and how we can tune in and learn to support one another. So, Michele, would you do us the honors of telling us a little bit more about yourself? And I know you have a group practice and consulting business, so would love for our audience to learn a little bit more about that as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Julia, for having me, sharing insights and education on mental health and what you bring to the table as well. My name is Dr. Michele Vecchione-Finneran. I'm a PhD therapist in a group practice called Vecc and Associates in sunny South Florida area. I started really early in the field of mental health about 25 years ago when back in the I'm dating myself right now in the 80s and the 90s. And as a mental health provider, I've always even thought that mental health back then needed to be at the forefront and just wasn't because of the stigmatization of it. In today's day and age, we see such a desire with, the pandemic and the school shootings to destigmatize mental health, illness, and people's psychological well-being. And as a professional in the mental health, as a mental health therapist and provider in my group practice, I saw more and more of a need. So I decided to grow from a solo practitioner into a group practice, where I hired and have an associate, growing and thriving group practice where we help and provide quality care mental health services in our local Florida communities. Additionally, as owner and business owner of Vecc and Associates, I myself am leading more on the consulting side of the practice, where my niche is first responders and service providers, me helping people who help other people, to provide for cities, municipalities, agencies, and to get upper administration to understand how to address and destigmatize mental health in these political areas. Um, and how to destigmatize mental health and well-being to address and be there for their employees and a different level and a different capacity.
Yeah, with the
Right.
work you're, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
The work you're doing is so amazing, and you've been so ahead of the ball and so ahead of the movement. Now, we've been seeing, over the past few years, especially since the pandemic, a huge uprise in mental health nonprofits and mental health treatment companies. But you've been doing this work for such a long time. And so you have a much deeper understanding than most people do and different perspectives because you've seen mental health and the stigma surrounding it change and grow and fluctuate over time. So you really bring such a unique perspective to the table.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's very interesting how much people in mental health, people's mental health has changed from a developmental level, rearing as a child upward, and how situationally and society situationally has changed it's in itself, which has changed other people's mental health as well, as that they kind of go both hand in hand. So I have seen, because I've been in the field for so long, starting at 18, I've seen such a vast change and transitions in the mental health field and people in it, getting services, receiving service, accepting, asking for help, not feeling ashamed or embarrassed to seek out a professional, or realizing maybe their friends don't have the capacity to help them as much as a professional with schooling, education, training, CEUs to kind of help the public deal with what's going on in society. When I went to school, I didn't have classes or courses to deal with how to deal with a school shooting or a pandemic. So that's where training comes in place. I'm constantly getting trained. I'm constantly signing up for trainings, especially in my niche. It's doing contracting work for first responders and service providers. I'm looking at organizations and municipalities and put in place health and wellness trainings for their employees and on-site consulting to ensure that people who do public service and public work and helping the community are mentally fit and are able to provide quality and compassionate care for the people in the community.
Right. Yeah. And this month, I know that Vecc and Associates is putting an extra focus on suicide prevention and awareness for first responders, which I think is so interesting because myself as the founder of a mental health training company, for the longest time, I've been trying to figure out how do we break into working with first responder units, because police officers and firefighters and EMTs, they're seeing very traumatizing incidents on a constant basis. And they're also dealing with people who are struggling with mental health on a constant basis. So, can you tell us some more, like some research that you've done, some statistics that you've found about mental health in the first responder space?
Absolutely. I did some research on it. The research has been back in 2020, where police officers are more likely to die from suicide than actually in the line of duty. So that's a
Oh,
staggering statistic, and that's super scary. And back in 2020, 116 police officers died by suicide, while 113 died in line of duty. And this is like academic research. So in 2021, that number rose to 150 officers dying by suicide. Tragically, law enforcement officers have a 54% chance of increase of suicide risk compared to the civilian population based on what they see. That's not privy to the human eye, public eye. So they see things that we as public don't see. The problem seems to even get worse with smaller departments that you see where there's not a lot of extensive support and there's not a lot of peer support, which is becoming new and upcoming for municipalities and cities, is having peer support resources. So that's becoming more and more prevalent in cities and municipalities. In 2012, a publisher of an international journal of emergency mental health found that departments with less than 50 full-time officers have a suicide rate over triple that departments that have over 500 full-time officers. So we see the
wow.
smaller the departments, the less support there is, the more probably stigmatized it is. And this is concerning as 49% of police departments in the United States employ less than 10 full-time officers. So it's concerning because they're small and the cities are broken up as such, so they're not really huge cities. That's why you see cities kind of collaborating with each other to make it a bigger department.
Yeah. And what have you learned about the training that's already in place or the resources that are already available for police officers and first responders? Is there many? I know that it's an interesting dynamic because a lot of times when a bystander sees someone having a mental health crisis or experiencing an episode of some sort or causing some sort of disturbance due to mental health issues, their first response is to call the police. The police have go through lots and lots of training on how to deal with these types of situations, but how extensive is the actual mental health training that they go through? Is it common for them to specifically learn how to deal with mental health crises? And then also in reverse, what kind of, or alternatively, what kind of resources are available to police officers? Are there many resources for them to turn to when it comes down to their own mental health?
Yeah, that's actually a great question and one that's being examined and evaluated regularly because I know to get into the department and departments you have to pass a psych eval. Now, in terms of I'm sure there's like on-site training for having to deal with Baker Act. There's actually specialized units for Baker Act teams. and the crisis stabilization department. But I mean, dealing with mental health and dealing with the public who has mental health is it can be very confusing. It can be if you've never been trained in this field. And that's why back in the day, there was, they wanted to eliminate law enforcement officers or have social workers go along with law enforcement officers to identify. I think it would be better for law enforcement officers to get educated in the public's mental health and do a little bit of training. But their mental health, because of what they see, is at risk. And that's where I kind of come in, is not only identifying public that has mental health and what to do and how to provide resources for the community, but also to protect their own mental health. And it's the mentality of first responders, putting everybody else first and, negating themselves is something that really we have to kind of debunk, because first responders need to put their mental health and their well-being first and primarily in order for them to have proficient care for the community. So progressive cities, it depends on the city of how progressive the city is becoming in terms of their trainings and their wellness programs. And if they have mental health clinicians on site to help, having mental health clinicians show up and be seen and be a part of the agency or the city to kind of get people more familiarized as a first responder, more comfortable with the clinician on hired as a contractor. It's very important. It's very hard to break through this brotherhood and sisterhood because of that. It is a brotherhood and sisterhood that they feel that people really don't understand unless you're in combat with them. So it's very hard to get your foot into the door into some of these cities that maybe still they don't want to admit it, but maybe still do feel that mental health is kind of viewed as being weak or viewed
Right.
as being like, you're kind of being a sissy, which is really not the case at all. We realize nowadays more than ever that when you reach out for help, it's a sign of courage and bravery, and they're taking your self-care and your mental health and well-being into consideration while still outpouring to the community and providing, care giving to the community as a first responder or service provider.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You touched upon the fact that there's, when we think about stigma, a lot of it is the stigma can exist in different ways and manifest in different ways. And one of the ways that we see it manifest a lot amongst men in general, and also, especially first responders, that, like you said, that they have this tough guy mentality. They have these expectations of themselves, and others have those expectations of them too. And people are afraid to talk about mental health for those reasons. When you connect it to physical health, if you think about someone who went and got a colonoscopy, or they went to get a mammogram or whatever it is, you think, oh, well, good for them. They're staying ahead of the curve to make sure that their health is in check so that they can live happy lives, be supportive member of society, do their job. And when it comes to seeking out mental health care, like you said, it's seen as a weakness in many different ways. And so, I just wish, and I'm sure, and I know that we share this wish and desire that there would be more grace when it comes to talking about mental health, and there'd be more of an equal playing field when it comes to mental health versus physical health.
I agree. I agree. I think now we see it more so now than more than ever than I've ever have been seen in the past 30 years of or 25 years of my professional life, that mental health is becoming more and more of the forefront. And now some progressive departments in law enforcement is mandatory to have stress management programs, mental health programs. I work with a department right now that it's mandatory to seek a therapist. I think that's super progressive,
Yeah.
and I think that's very important to safeguard this first responders that protect and service providers mental health, and really know what to do when you start to feel something and you don't really know what it is, but something feels off or wrong, or doesn't feel right. So it's learning what to do about that and how to recognize it, and not be afraid to reach out and ask for the help that they need, and making sure that the cities and the organizations and municipalities provide the resources to their employees to protect them and to keep them healthy.
Yeah, to that point, ask, do you feel like a big part of the problem is not only societal, but also systemic?
I definitely, I feel like, especially in a higher echelons and administration, I feel like it's more and more problematic. And because they're not at the grassroots really seeing the incidences, critical incidences, and being exposed to, but there's so much that administration can do to top all the way down to the grassroots, that can really help support people that are on the front lines. And I feel like a lot of the hospitals have this issue. Some law enforcement agencies have this issue that are not really as progressive. Fire stations and EMTs, even community mental health agencies, they don't have the resources and the trainings. And, it takes more than just an HR department. It takes a whole wellness and health, division, I feel, to help uh, be progressive, to make sure their employees' health is in check, both physically and mentally. I mean, first responders have to get physicals every so often. Why not have mental health checks every few months to make sure that they're fit to duty,
Right.
and that they're able, and it's not a disciplinary action, it's a more like make sure that you're safe and that you feel comfortable serving the public in a way that's going to be productive and proficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you actually wrote a book called The Compassion Conundrum: Strategies for First Responders and Service Providers to Prevent Fatigue. And I know this was inspired by the fact that, one of the leading factors and causes of suicide is stress and burnout. So can you tell us a little bit more about this book or manual?
Yeah.
And then, how do we find it?
Yes. So with this manual, it's about a 49-page manual. It's broken down to decipher, because people, like I said before, people feel like something is wrong, but they can't identify it. So I break down the differences and the similarities between stress, burnout, and compassion fatigue. So the biggest proponent of symptomology of compassion fatigue is a combination of prolonged burnout. A lot of people don't know what compassion fatigue is. They know what stress is, they know what burnout is, but they don't really know what compassion fatigue is. And it's really the negative costs for caring, as Charles Figley, who was a pioneer in studying and researching compassion fatigue, talks about, like a different level of exhaustion, a prolonged burnout that takes place, and vicarious trauma or secondary trauma along with PTSD. People in these fields typically that are desensitized and decompartmentalize very well with coping strategies to not talk or speak much about what they see and the surmountable amount of disturbing trauma that they're being witnessed or being talked about on a day-to-day basis. So this not only affects the professionals mentally and emotionally, but also severely, there can become physically debilitating, because the manifestations that happen psychologically get stored in the body as well. We know that about trauma.
Right.
Because of all these intense symptoms, just to name a few, one might experience like irritability, being short fused, having conflictual challenges in their relationships or in their families, being unmotivated, and a certain level of apathy, like, which is like not having the ability to care, which is the ability of not caring, which bleeds into the decreased level of compassion. And that's why there's such a fatigue, because first responders and service providers, because they deal with people and they help people, need to have a level of compassion. And when you have prolonged burnout, such as coined as compassion fatigue, you no longer have the ability to be compassionate, and you're just merely in survival mode.
Wow. That is really interesting and so important for people to understand. Um, there's like there's so many, that's really important. That's really important for people to understand because I don't think people think about compassion fatigue, especially for first responders. Like I would think about it for therapists or
Mhm.
psychologists or, psychiatrists that are, listening to people share their difficulties on a daily basis and always having empathy and always having that. But I don't think about it, for police officers. It just never came to mind that it's exhausting to constantly be supporting other people, both emotionally and also with first responders. It's a lot of the time physically.
Mhm.
So it makes sense that there would be that burnout and that it would affect them in so many different aspects of their life. How can people access this manual?
So, one of the things that it's on Amazon and it's also on my website. It's called the Compassion Conundrum: Strategies for First Responders and Service Providers to Prevent Fatigue. It's there. It's there's an ebook. There's an ebook.
Oh, great.
There's a printed manual, and it's not expensive. It's just and it's basically it's a short manual because again, people get these terminologies confused, and stress is a low level, then you have burnout, which is a little bit more intense level, and then you have compassion fatigue, which is designated for the caring professional, and that's a very heightened severe level when you're feeling that.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. How can so you're located in Florida. How could potential clients contact you for your therapeutic services, or how can someone work with you via your consulting services?
The best way to reach me would be through my website, which is veccandassociates.com, Vecc, VECC and associates.com. And there's a plethora of information. You can see my team, my clinician. There's a way to receive therapeutic services. There's a way to receive consulting services. It's all kinds of good free resources with like blogs and videos, YouTube videos like this, all free on my website. Just to for people want to think about starting therapy, the first thing that they ask us is resources on the internet and social media. So that's the first way to get people enticed and to really get committed to their mental health, is them educating themselves a little bit on what we have at our fingertips, just to get people starting to think about their own mental health.
Amazing. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for being here with us today. This was so informative and helpful and definitely made me think in a new way about first responders and their mental health. So I really appreciate it and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, Julia, for having me. I appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.